Kai Wright. On the next Notes from America, a listener exit poll. Abortion rights, democracy. What really motivated voters in these midterms? And what can we expect from the new political order? Listen now wherever you get your podcasts.
Listener supported. WNYC Studios.
Now we're going to talk with one funny man who teamed up with another funny man to put the stories of the first funny man's career making funny movies in the form of funny pages. I'm talking about actor, comedian, musician, and writer Steve Martin and his co-conspirator, New York Times bestselling cartoonist Harry Bliss. They've teamed up for their second collaboration. The book is called Number One is Walking, My Life in the Movies and Other Diversions. It's always interesting to take a deep dive into the life of a beloved cultural icon, right? We love a good biographical film, and you know here on All of It, we can spend a whole week unpacking a new biography book. This book is a bit different because it's in cartoon form, and it's a really fun way to get a peek into the life and career of Steve Martin. The title is a reference to what a member of a film crew announces over the radio when the star of the movie is headed to the set. The first person on the call sheet, number one, is walking, a line that seemed to tickle Steve Martin as it followed him around on the set of The Jerk in 1979, and it stuck with him. The book follows the multi-talented Martin through his first experiences on the film set for Carl Reiner's directed film The Jerk. Through Harry's illustrations, readers get to see how he felt watching the premiere of his first movie. In a speech bubble next to the drawing of an audience in hysterics, Steve says, "This is how stupid I was. I thought, this is easy." We get some behind-the-scenes looks at the writing of Roxanne and how Steve convinced Hollywood bigwigs to pay for an adaptation of Cyrano de Bergerac. And we get to see Steve Martin's career shift from movies to brushes with some equally iconic musicians and finally to streaming, where he's now landed as co-stars with his old friend Martin Short and his new friend Selena Gomez in Only Murders in the Building. Steve Martin, Harry Bliss, and Nathan Lane will be in conversation tonight at the Town Hall. But I got a chance to spend some time with Steve and Harry, and here's how that conversation went. In the prologue of the book, you're really honest about a personal reason of why you wanted to leave stand-up, that loneliness on the road. And you wanted to, as you put it, get off the stand-up train and throw my bags and myself on the movie train. When did you know it was time to try something new creatively?
It was at the moment where I felt I was being repetitive and I wasn't inspired to be unrepetitive in stand-up. And I saw the opportunity for movies to do something new and different every day and also get it right, as right as you can get it, and then it's on film. And, the travel was wearying. And I just saw, and actually that metaphor of, if that's a metaphor, of the train coming is not something I came up with when I wrote this book. It was something I actually felt at the time, that there was this opportunity to jump onto another train, and I needed to take it right then.
Harry, what was interesting to you about this project creatively?
Well, it was working with Steve, number one. And
that's the way I felt.
Yeah. He makes me laugh. He's funny. Mm-hmm. And his, I'm a film fan. There's that aspect of it too. So the idea that I would have an opportunity to listen to anecdotes of Steve's career and anecdotes that, are wide ranging a little bit, that involve other actors and many of the films I had seen seemed very appealing to me. And I'd never really collaborated with anybody before. What I do is a sole thing. I sit in a room and draw all by myself with music and
cocktail.
And a cocktail. So, and then, the Steve would send me gag ideas and so it worked out really well. And he's very easygoing, he's a very easy person to collaborate with.
Harry, are there any of the movies of Steve's that you really liked that you think about differently now after having heard the anecdotes and having had to draw them?
No one's asked me that. I don't think so. I've gone back and watched one particular scene that's in the book, anecdote, I should say, that's in the book where Steve's in a jail cell. It's from Dirty Rotten Scoundrels, and he's trying to remember a name. And when I first saw that film, I loved that scene so much. But what I learned from the book and from Steve's anecdote is that there was Frank Oz, the director, was kind of pulling on his leg and giving him direction there. So yeah, there's some.
Just below Frank, he's pulling on the actor's leg to tell him when I was done.
It's fun, Steve, to think of the idea that you and Harry have decided to use still images to describe the moving images, the moving pictures. Is there something that illustration can convey about some of those moments that maybe even just watching them actually on the film, you don't get the nuance, some nuance?
For me, when you're telling, when in my first memoir of my stand-up career, Born Standing Up, there was a real story to tell. When you're telling the story of my movie career, there is no story to tell. There is anecdotes. And, I met this person, I did this, and then this funny thing happened and that, but it's not really a story. And so what the illustration does is make very succinct the exposition. So I don't have to go through, it was a dark and stormy night and we were on the sofa and the light was low, and it's all told in an instant. And I love the way Harry tells those stories. I mean, there's a drawing in there that I love of Jackie Onassis's apartment, and you see her life. There's the chandelier, there's the elegant steps, there's a Picasso, Marie Therese painting. That's one thing about working with Harry. If I say or he says, we're in an art museum, and I'll say, you're looking in front of Rembrandt, and he'll draw Rembrandt, and he can also draw Mondrian,
Did you ever get mischievous, Steve, and try to stump him in his writing, illustrating capacity?
Yeah, I don't work that way in acting or any of this. I try to trick your partner. You try to contribute to your partner and help them. Yeah.
My guests are Steve Martin and Harry Bliss. We're talking about the new book, Number One is Walking My Life in the Movies and Other Diversions. So through the many panels, Harry, we see a common thread of Steve suddenly having an idea and saying and waking you up. Harry, I remembered a story. Wake up. Is that close to accurate? Did the ideas just come and Steve needed to tell you right away, or did you guys work in a more formal situation?
Well, I think Steve, I drew those scenarios, and I think Steve and I discussed some of those opening kind of shots, because you sort of need, in comic strips, you need it's good to have like an opening, an establishing shot. So I always thought it was fun to have Steve sort of waking me and my dog Penny up in the middle of the night because he remembered an anecdote. I just thought that was a fun way to enter
the
into
truth is I might send him an email in the middle of the night. I mean, I said in the last book, I said one great thing about working with Harry, who lives in New Hampshire and I live here, is we never see each other.
What do you look for in a collaborator, Steve?
Ease. I started in writing for the Smothers Brothers Comedy Hour in a comedy writer's room, and I would work with a partner, Bob Einstein, who recently passed away. And sometimes you work in a group, and you just can't hang on to things. You try to make you try to be positive rather than negative. And I don't know. I just I can throw away something in a second if the other person doesn't respond. Okay, that's gone. Yeah. And it's how you lead to even a bad idea can lead to a good idea. So everybody in that room participates.
We get a sense through the book, Steve, that you really have picked up pieces of wisdom from people that in your life? I feel like you might be a person who collects wisdom. We see your interactions with Gene Kelly and Milton Berle and Cary Grant, filmmakers and writers like Lily Tomlin and John Hughes. Some of the advice is very funny. Some of it seems really useful. Is there any of that wisdom that you've learned about your art, your work, that translates into real life, that can help you in your real life?
Well, I tell a story in our book, which Harry illustrates beautifully. I did a movie which is very little known. It's called A Simple Twist of Fate. As a matter of fact, this is a bit of trivia, but Anne H was in that movie, and through the editing process, she got cut out. But which happens in movies. But I worked with two. When you work with children in a movie, if they're toddlers, you work with twins. So if one is crying, the other one can be brought in. And so I was working with these two little girls. I think they were maybe 3, and their parents were always on the set. And we were in a small town, so it was a very big deal for everybody to have the movie around. And I kept observing these children, and no matter what we put them in a hot air balloon. We put them in. They were always happy, and they were laughing. And if there was a little tears, it went away in a second. And finally, I said to the parents, I said, "Your children are so happy. How do you raise them? What's your secret?" And they looked at me like they'd never thought about it. And then finally, I could see the father searching his mind, and he said, "Well, we use humor." And I realized, what a great idea to use humor to raise children. You can be ironic, you can say funny things, instead of getting mad, you can get funny. And I remember that.
Listening, reacting. She's sort of like a little Greek chorus in a way. What does Penny add to the storytelling?
Well, sadly, I have to say, Penny did pass away a year ago. So I hate to say that, but she lived 17 years. She was a fantastic dog. But I still draw her and keep her going. And I just love the interaction that she and Steve have in the book. I honestly did that just because it made me laugh. And and Steve's a dog person. He's had dogs and now has a new dog, and he's an animal person like me. So we share the love of animals.
Well, you get, you said Greek chorus. It's absolutely perfect because, if I say something like, they say, "Where'd you get the idea for Roxanne?" I say, "Well, I was talking to David Z. Goodman," and Penny can go, "Oh yeah, he wrote Straw Dogs." So you get this kind of information in without having to do a footnote or another paragraph of explanation. It's just so quick, and it's kind of funny that the dog knows.
Yeah, there's one in there where we're riding bikes in the Strip, and I'm holding Penny, and Steve goes on to tell an anecdote, and Penny's thought balloon as she looks off into Hollywood is, "There's money to be made here."
Penny was a sophisticate.
Yeah.
My guests are Steve Martin and Harry Bliss. We're talking about their book. Number 1 is Walking My Life in the Movie and Other Diversions.
By the way, it's a 12-word title. I never did a book ever with a 12-word title.
Were there
Not fit on the marquee, that's for sure. That's why it's not a movie. Couldn't fit on the marquee.
Harry, when you pick images, I'm wondering if you have sort of a certain alphabet as an illustrator, because I noticed with the glasses, especially Steve's glasses, it's always just round circles. And some of the other glasses, you don't see the eyes. Is that a particular...
And they're strangely opaque. You're right. They're opaque.
Yeah.
The glass. They seem to always be reflecting something that you don't see.
Yeah. And I've been asked this recently, and I've been asked it in the past too, by actually when I used to tour and at elementary schools and draw for kids, they would ask me that. I find that sometimes when I put eyes in, it's almost too much for some reason. It's too specific. And I think I picked that up from a great New Yorker cartoonist whose work I've always loved, Saul Steinberg. And he would often draw his characters without eyes, just glasses. And I only do it with people who wear glasses. I don't know. It seems to fit
However, your dog eyes are very expressive and emotional. I mean, sometimes Penny has the look of surprise, inquisitiveness, adoration. I mean, Penny has more emotions than I do in life.
Also, I'm curious about the choice of the font for the cover with the very long title. What went into the choice, into the art direction on this? It feels very old Hollywood.
Well, that cover was designed by Lori Butler, who is a designer in Sausalito in Northern California, I should say. So we reached out to her, and she designed the jacket.
But also, you should know that in the context of the book, where there's captions and writing, that's actually Harry's writing. That was so distinct, it was turned into a font for us to use.
Yeah.
That's kind of wild.
Yeah, have your own handwriting turned into a font.
Anybody could do that, actually.
Well, not anybody, Harry.
Well, but yeah, that makes.
I could do it, but the demand is not there.
The demand would be low.
Yeah.
The second half of the book, the other diversions part, has standalone illustrations, less memoir, leaning more explicitly into the humor. For example, I think the one that made me I snort laughed was very cute puppy, very cute kitten, sitting on a couch, each reading a book. The dog is reading How to Win Friends and Influence People. The cat is reading
interpretation.
So, Harry, in terms of, and please weigh in, Steve, there are certain sort of rhythms to comedy and beats to comedy and timing to comedy. Is there a parallel in illustration?
Yeah, I mean, illustration's more cartooning. So is what those are. Whereas illustrations are really are images that illustrate a story, and these cartoons are different. So
cartoons are telling a story. I have to jump in here because I think I call myself the writer of this book.
Okay.
But Harry, if you notice, he talks in cinematic terms. He's the director. He's the costumer. He's the set decorator. He's the props guy. He's casting. So he's doing all these other things to help tell this story.
Which is a blast for me to do as someone who loves film, But there is a rhythm. I think there is. I mean, there's a rhythm to captions, and there's a certain amount of brevity, which sometimes is in order. And Steve's great at that, and helping me with captions and so on.
And there's also, like you say, the momentum of a strip. By the size of the panels. If you do a smaller panel, it moves a little quicker. It's leading to the next larger panel. When the pages turn, you wouldn't if you can, you'd save the punchline for the page turn, especially in certain, not always, but in certain contexts of this.
As the writer, what new muscles or did you have to use in writing for this book? This is a very specific kind of writing, Steve.
Yes. Well, you're actually using fewer because you're not setting the scene. You're able to, I never did a memoir of my movie career because I thought, well, it's just anecdotes. And that makes an anecdote is brief and it's terse. And to write it in paragraphs and to have these lengthy intros and outros and philosophies, character descriptions. You can just see the character in 1 second on a page. So this turned out to be the perfect thing because I never wanted to tell the stories because it would just be, for a little nugget, you'd have to go 3 pages. Here you go, a little nugget, you go half a page.
Were these anecdotes that you had just collected over time and sort of either put away mentally or written down in a journal?
Mentally, I didn't write them down. And then I started writing them down. And it was amazing because when I wrote my first book on the story of my stand-up, I actually interviewed people who were there that helped with my memory to say, oh, that's right, I did this and that's right, here's the secret. But here, the stories would come, and they're still coming, by the way, stories.
That's one of the things I really enjoy about memoir is because it's not biography, it doesn't have to be on this day, X happened,
Right.
and here, and I need the witness and the fact check and the footnote. It's your memory. It's of what you remember, and it's the feeling that you had in that moment that you would like to share with people.
We were talking about philosophy again, anything that affected. I remember there's a line from the book. We were screening All of Me privately for Lily Tomlin and myself and Carl Reiner. And we were just like 5 people in a room. And we could tell it was good. We liked it. And Lily got up and she said, it's good. She said, when you're editing it, don't forget to leave in the boring parts. And, as a comedian, you're always going, let's get to the next joke. Let's get to the next joke. But here, the boring parts are the setups, are the things that make an event happen, that have the audience invested in it.
Is there an equivalent for you, Harry, of leaving in the boring parts in an illustration?
Well, I think it's tricky because boring is such kind of a punitive word here. But I think the boring parts in the book would be the landscapes, maybe. You know what I mean, Allison? Like when you open up the first panel and Steve is walking with Penny, and that could be construed as boring, but that I think that's similar. You are setting it up. Like there's one strip in there where Steve's in a boat with Penny, and Penny's fishing, and I forget the anecdote, but it's from All of Me. It's from All of Me. It's an anecdote from All of Me, and but in the background, Penny catches a fish, and then cuts the fish up and puts the fish away in the freezer at the end of the anecdote. So it's just
it's got a little backstory. I think Harry and I both go back to Mad Magazine, where there's always some narrative going on in the background that has nothing to do with the story.
It's also really great because you really, Harry, you give us time and place. Like you don't have to tell me that's the Guggenheim, but I know.
Right.
But I know, right? I know, and it helps. It helps give me time and place as a viewer. Like, oh, okay, this is what they were doing. This is what that experience might have been like in that moment. Steve, were there any that didn't make the anecdotes that didn't make the book? Can
you recall, Harry? We edited a few cartoons.
Yeah, I think I'm trying to think. There are other anecdotes. I mean, and I think what's one that there was a Harrison Ford one that.
Yeah, that's hard to explain.
It's hard to explain. Yeah,
could never quite get it in text what the actual funny part was.
Yeah.
Well, that's telling that it's hard to explain. So he can't make it. Doesn't really work for the project.
It came out backwards. It's the anecdote is an actual compliment. I don't want to tell it because it involves some words, but he actually comes off really well. But in the telling of it, if you weren't there, it could come off negative. And I didn't want to confuse that or add. And he was being funny.
Yeah. And there was one that you told me with Eddie Murphy, which I don't know if we can say on the air, but. Not because it's offensive, but it's hilarious.
Yeah.
But they might end up in the next book.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm gonna hope that one ends up in the next book.
It's really good.
Wow, our whole audience is going, please tell us.
Don't tease the audience like that. I hope you got this. Too frustrating.
Or sales for your next book. I did want to ask you why I stopped doing movies. I did want to just take a moment to ask about Only Murders in the Building, given I am in WNYC, a place that makes podcasts. We are audio professionals. I know several of my friends and colleagues are pretty obsessed with watching the show. What's something you've learned about audio playing a amateur podcaster?
I don't know, but I have my theories about true crime shows. Like when I first started watching true crime shows, what I loved was the solving. And how they did it, and the DNA, and CCTV, and all that evidence and clues. But it kind of morphed from the solving to the pain and agony. So people are weeping, and they're reenacting scenes. And I have to say, I have a lot of respect for writers, but sometimes they're not well written, because the narrator will say, and then Charles came home and was angry and threw a teapot out the window. And then they have Charles come home and he goes, I'm so angry, and picks up a teapot and throws it through the window. It's got the first rule of writing is, don't reiterate. So anyway, so that has changed. But what was funny about Only Murders in the Building was that we were such amateurs. And here's Marty Short carrying around a pole mic. And eventually he couldn't do that anymore. We got an actual handheld tape recorder for him.
Steve,
I love Brazos too. Brazos' character is just hilarious.
Oh, the hat.
It's so good.
Well, one day I was, my character on Brazos was a hat and a coat and a thing. And one day I was out in Manhattan, and I had my glasses on. I had a COVID mask on. I was wearing a hat, and I went into a drugstore, and a guy said, "Hey, love the show." And I thought, how did he even know who I was? And I realized I'm dressed exactly in life as I do with the hat and the coat, and I'm looking exactly like my character.
Tonight, Steve, you and Nathan Lane will be at New York City's Town Hall. What do you have plans? Your fellow Only Murders in the Building co-star and general fantastic New Yorker of talent.
I find that these things generally go well. It's three people having fun. Nathan is fantastic. And it's always surprising what comes out. I mean, we're there to talk about the book, and we'll probably show illustrations from the book. Definitely we will. And, we haven't even really talked about the cartoons, which I'm glad are there now. They do make me laugh. In cartooning, you're allowed to laugh at your own stuff. For one reason, you never get a chance to test it. A movie, you screen it 5 times and edit it. And live performance, you go out in front of an audience, for a week, and you hone it. But here, you just get it done and put it in a book.
And sometimes I'll get an email from Steve out of the blue that will just say, looking at the certain cartoon from the book, the first book, and he'll just write, still makes me laugh.
That's great.
Just nice.
My guests have been... Oh, please.
We love ourselves, you can tell.
But the comics, some of them are just so funny. Let me through, just a man running, screaming into the room, I'm a mansplainer.
I love this. It's a female book club, and they're all sitting around talking, and a very desperate lawyer-looking guy with a briefcase bursts through and says, "Let me through, I'm a mansplainer." And, one of the highlights is you look at the cat down below, and the cat has a freaked out look on its face.
The cat is horrified. It is. Thank you for the book. It's an excellent book. It's thoughtful, and it also makes you laugh out loud. My guests have been Steve Martin and Harry Bliss. The name of the book is #1 is Walking My Life in the Movies and Other Diversions. Long title. They'll be at New York City's Town Hall tonight. Thank you for the time.
Thank you.
Thanks, Allison.
I'll see you, Harry.
See you, Steve.